Welcome to Automation's official design competition. In this video you are joining us for the roundtable discussion of the finalist designs in Category I, the 2020's luxury interiors. Your hosts Chris and Rob are joined by today's very special guest and judge Shinyodd. He's a prominent Automation and BeamNG streamer with a large community on Twitch and YouTube. He's known for his wacky humour, his great automation build skills and car knowledge, as well as for being a lover of all things JDM. We usually start by asking our guest judge a few questions first, but as a returning guest, instead we are linking to the previous interview here and dive right into a more in-depth analysis of each finalist in an open roundtable format.
Okay, so we are here for Category I, the 2020's luxury car interior with none other than Shinyodd.
Hello.
I do have one question for you, as this is rather topical now. You are an excellent builder for automation cars, as we have seen in a certain other category. And one of the things that came to mind looking at that category was the interior on display. So after having seen these entries, do you think of it as a missed chance for yourself to be in this category as well?
See, this category here in particular, of course, is for 2020 designs, and I must admit I am less familiar with sort of modern car interiors, but there's definitely a level of appreciation I still hold for them, because when it comes to a lot of modern car interiors, you have things like screens everywhere, and I'm not the biggest fan of that sort of thing, but I think if they're implemented very well, I can find myself appreciating them just as much as I can any other era of car design. So it's not something I've personally indulged too much into, you know, the study of, or just the appreciation of, if you want to dumb it down to that level. But yeah, it's something I would definitely try a hand in.
Also, naturally, you prefer pistol-shaped steering wheels instead of this modern stuff.
Yes, generally I probably would, but, you know, as long as the steering wheel is comfortable to hold in my eyes, then I'm probably gonna like it. I sort of just look at things and go, that looks like it would fit my hands, yes. Whereas a lot of modern wheels can feel very heavy looking, very chunky. Yeah, I've got small hands. So you can still pull it off well, but when it comes to luxury cars, generally, you do seem to find they're a little bit more complicated and stuff like that, so a good-looking steering wheel can definitely sell me on a design like this.
Alright, we shall find out if we see any in this selection.
Indeed.
Indeed we shall. It's quite a first impression, that isn't it? Of course, we're judging the interior, not necessarily the car, but it does look like a car that would suit a more luxury styled sort of interior. It's like a higher end sedan, that seems to be what they're going for. So let's have a look inside and see exactly what they have to offer. Right away, we've got the screen down the middle, that's to be expected in this sort of era, as well as that big chunky steering wheel with the big badge in the middle, really flexing the car brand to the driver the entire time he's driving. And you have more traditional looking dials, not so much of a screen by the looks of things behind the steering wheel, which isn't necessarily wrong, but it would be maybe a little bit out of fashion, one could argue. You've got the text on the dashboard on the right, presumably a model name. I do quite like that, I always quite have. And the colours here, quite a contrast, very dark with a very light sort of beige. And you know what, that's not the worst in the world either. I think that's fairly okay. Let's have a look at see what they've done in the back and see if it suits what they've done in the front. Well, the seats do match up the colours, and they seem pretty simple, nothing too crazy, but your standard 5-seating, 3 abreast arrangement in the back, that seems pretty alright to me. I will say, definitely not the most exciting looking interior that I've ever seen, but it's not inappropriate. I think when we look here, the door card's very simple as well. You can see there's a door pocket, and there's, you know, down where your arm is, you've got the switches on it, a door handle. It's not missing anything, but you know, I suppose it doesn't have any special uniqueness to it. Nothing too over the top or creative. What do you guys think?
Well, I generally agree with what Shiny has to say, is that this is maybe not like a truly luxury car interior, but this feels more like either a really nice sort of mainstream production car or like a premium luxury car, sort of like a junior executive car, like a BMW 3 Series or an Audi A4 type of vehicle. It's generally well put together, I have to say. There are a couple details here and there that I I look at and don't particularly care too much for. I think the choice of how the colors are laid out is maybe a little bit jarring, because the light beige leather is just such a huge contrast with the black trim and the black leather. It's a little bit on it's a little bit on the jarring side, I would say. It needs a lot more of the light color, I think, to really work. Otherwise, it just looks like it's kind of thrown in there and without really a whole lot of care or concern to how the colors interact with one another. I think the back seats they're very simple, maybe perhaps too simple for a car of this kind. It really does kind of make the car feel very down market in a lot of ways. A few more details perhaps in the door cards would have been nice as well. I think they are very simple, and certainly it's not really in keeping with the style of cars these days, and perhaps the style of cars we're going to see in the next generation. Also, I would like to comment that maybe it would have been nice to have a sunroof in this interior, because it feels, especially with the black headliner, it feels very dark and very confining inside, which is, I'm not sure if that's really what you want to do, and certainly in a smaller car like this, it just kind of, it does kind of take away a little bit from the airiness of it overall. What do you feel, Rob? How do you feel about this, Rob?
Overall, I quite like the colors, but I fully agree with what you're saying. It is a stark contrast, and with it being bold in terms of color choice, I think it is then not backing that up with substantial amounts of detailing that follows that theme. And yes, I think in the doors especially, this is much more akin to like basic interior. Of course, it is a big pain in the behind to actually make all that in automation, but it's not impossible, wouldn't we have seen it? So if we look at the center, the front shot, and I really like the work that has been done on the center console there, and there's a lot of good detail in it. And just from this view alone, I expected a lot more from the rest of the interior, because this is very nicely put together, I think. Steering wheel and the lettering and all the little details and so on in the center console, that's really nicely done. And then it gets weaker towards the rear. And those free seats there, I would have liked to see some belt stuff as well. Like, how do you actually feel safe in this one? How do you hook up?
Yeah, I agree. There are some missing details here and there in the rear. I should point out, looking back towards the front view, is that a lot of what we do see here are actually mod fixtures from the Steam Workshop. So there is maybe a little bit less custom work that has gone into this, but it doesn't take away from the fact that it is very well proportioned and very well placed, regardless.
Indeed. It seems to be put together fairly well. And I do agree with all of your points, even though I fairly like the color scheme. They're definitely right. It's the contrast, maybe a slightly lighter of the dark, dark black shade, and slightly lighter, even that would have contrasted a little bit better with that. You sort of see the little silver, like sort of lining details between the bright color and the dark color on the seats and stuff like that. I think probably would have bunched off a little bit better, personally speaking, if that was done. And you can also see little details like bits of the door card clipping with the seats a tiny bit. Small little areas like that could just be tidied up and, be a bit more detail on them, and I definitely would have taken this to a different level. And yeah, it does feel fairly dark in here. I think a sunroof is a good suggestion.
One thing I would like to ask is the texture scale on the leather. Does it feel a little too large to you as well?
Ooh, possibly, yes. I would believe. I think so. I do think so, because it is quite. It looks almost like worn, even though it's a new car, in a way. So yeah, there's possibly that too, because you can see it very boldly in the door cards and everything as well. This is leather everywhere, but very visibly. And I know they want to show that it's leather, but maybe not so shouting it out loud, if you know what I mean.
Boy, this looks like dinosaur leather. It's so big. So it is. I think definitely it's a little bit too big, and maybe the texture's been turned up a little bit too much. It almost takes it away from looking like vinyl and almost like molded plastic with textures on it. It's kind of too much, I think. The texture size and the texture prominence, I think.
One thing I would like to praise here, though, is that to me, overall, this looks like a very consistent design, even though it has flaws in its detailing. Like the color theme is kept throughout, and there's not too much to distract from it. And how the seats are colored front to back is also pretty nice. That you do get a slight change up in the rear, but still staying consistent to that. And of course, I found in general that, well, consistent interiors seem to be a little easier than a consistent all-round car design because there's less different stuff, so to say. But I think it feels right from how the colors are being used.
I generally agree, and I'd also like to add that the interior in this car does feel like it fits with the exterior of the car, which is a very important consideration. It's in a car like this, a little bit maybe down market from what we were looking for in the design brief. We don't really want an interior that's like completely over the top with crazy features and whatnot. This fits very well with the theme, I think.
Now that's quite a striking sight, isn't it? Very sort of cyberpunky, futuristic kind of looking, big, heavy sedan. And I would imagine it has an interior sort of flashy to reflect what it looks like on the outside. And I believe I would be correct in saying so, because the insides, they look very, very, what's the word? Funky, I'm going to say. Let's have a look at that dashboard, shall we? Because that is very sort of, well, what's the word? I mean, creative for a start, but second of all, oh my goodness, it's like a sensory overload. In a kind of cool way, but is it too much? I'm not so sure. There's definitely a lot of purple lighting going on. There's a little bit of a purple theme, along with this sort of brown and black interior. I do think these colors are contrasting a little bit better, which is nice. And I believe we have a shot of the roof also, which shows even more purple. And also a big fold-down screen, and there is actually sunroofs in this one. And I do mean roofs, as it's plural. There's two of them. In case one wasn't enough, the backseat passengers can get sunburnt as well. I believe we can actually see what that screen in the back looks like too. There it is. Lots of nice entertainment for everyone in the back to enjoy on long car rides so they're not constantly pestering the driver if they're there yet or not. We can have a look at those speakers, I believe, on the door cards. Those glowing pink, that's great. I can almost imagine this being like an RGB car. The whole interior just lights up however you feel. But does I must say I quite like it. Maybe you could argue it's over the top. Maybe it could, but I kind of like that they've gone, that it all still flows together okay. Like they've gone with a clear idea in their head and they've executed it, and I can see that. And you know what? I do quite like it. But is it too much? That's probably what you guys are going to be better at deciding than me.
Oh, well, yes. I was quite surprised when I saw the interior. I did also get the slightly futuristic vibe there, towards this steampunky, cyberpunky direction. And the color theme on the inside is, creative. It was a good word choice there. But I don't think it quite works, not with the way it is done, at least. If we look at the straight front view of the center console and above, there is, as you were pointing out, just way too much going on. And I think one consistent theme throughout the car is that it is looking really busy, even though there is not all that much going on. And I think that is due to the texture that has been used, that is those shapes in the cloth or the leather or whatever it is, that is in the right center strip there where the steering wheel is sitting on. That one is horribly stretched for this one, and throughout the car you will have that in different shapes of different kind of stretchiness. It is again different there for the door cards. It seems to me like there is a lot of detail to look at, but it's quantity of detail over quality of detail. And I think especially those steampunky, kind of futuristic looks really benefit from being clean. And this is everything but. I do love the color contrast, not contrast, between the seat and the darker parts of it, the leather portions of it, and in general, lots of good detail. And the speakers are pretty cool. I have to give it that.
Yeah, I have to agree with everything that both of you said so far. I will say, though, I'm maybe a little bit of a dissenting opinion on the screen. I think that certainly the central screen up top it's busy, but it's exactly what you'd see from a car of this type, I think. With the vehicle parameters on the left, navigation and infotainment towards the center, and then the vehicle's model name off to the right-hand side. But I do agree that especially the quilting texture, which is what you'd call the sort of diamond cross-hatching along the door cards, is not very consistent from the sides to the front. It does kind of take away from the overall appearance of the vehicle. It's a little bit disappointing. I do like how the lights in the roof liner are taken care of. That's really cool. It gives a really nice interest to the vehicle. I should also point out that the screen that we have for the rear passengers, this is something that has actually been done very recently at the time of recording in a real vehicle, the new BMW 7 Series and i7. And I will caution those, and I imagine those in the future who are watching this far, far into the future will say, just because BMW has done it in this era does not necessarily mean it is a good idea.
Well, if we know anything about current car design trends, if there's one manufacturer not to copy, it's BMW. When it comes to interiors, however, I'm sure there's some nice examples you can definitely take good traits from. The screen, I must say, I wouldn't be buying a car myself with a giant flat screen hanging from the roof in the back. I'm not sure I want that smashing into the back of my head when I hit a lorry head-on at 70 miles an hour. I kind of want there to not be a screen behind me like that. But you know what? At least the rear passengers are entertained. I can give them that. Although I do very much agree what you were saying about that sort of cross-hatching pattern across the dashboard not being to the same scale as what's on the doors. I did very much pick up that on that myself, and I can't lie, it drives my OCD insane. It is bothering me, and I wish they would just patch a number of equally sized diamonds as on the doors together on the front, and I definitely think it wouldn't take away so much from that look on the dashboard in contrast to the rest of the car.
Yeah, I agree with that, and the issue that I have with that is that this person has obviously gone to a huge amount of work to make this interior look right. It feels like just a very minor, very simple oversight to correct. Instead of using the one fixture, use 3 instead, and then you could have basically maintained the aspect ratio of all the quilting on that panel. Just such a simple little thing that could have been fixed and would have really, really helped the way that this looked overall. I think also the choice of the leather, the perforations on it is maybe a little bit of a miss. I think they're a little bit too obtrusive, a little bit too big. What do you gentlemen think?
I quite like it personally, I'll be honest. I think it's okay.
I do like the idea, but I'm just not sure about how it was implemented. I mean, perforated leather is very nice to sit on. It's way nicer than just solid leather, but I just don't know personally. And it is just my own personal view on it for sure.
One thing that I'm really picking up on is that it was a tad unnecessary to have the contrast, the contrast purple color in the diamond hatching as well on the sides. That is just so much contrast and bling that really makes it even more contrasty. It takes away more from the rest of the interior. It doesn't feel like a luxury interior because of that, because it's luxury interior should also be about having a bit of quiet, isn't it? If you want it to. And looking anywhere in this car is not quite that quiet. But what I do like, as Chris was also pointing out, the skylights there are really nicely done. And, well, you could... The only thing that was missing in here to make it perfect bling would be have stained glass windows with mostly purple colors. Because this diamond hatching in the sunroofs, I don't know Who had that idea? Probably the designer, but I don't think it was a good one.
I didn't actually notice that until you pointed that out, but yeah, that is interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it's an interesting choice for sure. And I do tend to agree that overall this is a very visually noisy design. It's got a lot going on. It almost kind of assaults your senses looking at it. There's just so much happening. It does overall kind of have the feel of like what you'd expect for a limousine for a bachelorette night. Just a little bit over the top. But I mean that is kind of the trend in a lot of luxury cars these days. Is just go absolutely crazy with the details and crazy with all the colors and lights and everything.
Alright, well, this car, once again, looking kind of futuristic, but not too far in the future to where it's not believable. This seems to be another standard luxury sedan. We'll see if the interior seems to bounce off the exterior design. Let's have a look. What does it look like? Alright, well, interesting right away. You got a note that wood across the top of the dashboard behind the wheel with all these digital displays on top of it. Very interesting. I'm not too sure how much of a thing that is in the real world. As I say, I'm not too deep into what modern car interiors look like, but I know what I do and don't appreciate, and I do find it a little bit strange. But I will say, at least the colour of the wood does contrast with the brown they've got on the seats. If we have a look at those, you'll see not so much of a contrast as we've seen in the past cars. It's a dark colour on a dark colour, but it's alright. I kind of like it. I don't normally like too dark of a wood, but that's okay. Just because the wood seems to go along pretty well with what they've done in the seats, I would say. You can see the rear trays in the back of the seats. That's pretty cool, so you can sit and eat while you're being driven along. You're being chauffeured in your luxury sedan. They've even got some sort of display or logo on them. I'm not entirely sure, but it's interesting. I'll definitely say that much. I don't know. I find this one's definitely not as over the top as the last one. I'm not sure anything will be as over the top as that, but one thing I do appreciate in a lot of luxury car designs personally is there's a sort of beauty in simplicity. As much as there's a lot of appreciation in going over the top and doing it well, I do quite like a simple thing. And the front seat design does, I believe, match the rear seat design in this car pretty well. And that's even something like that is, yeah, it does. There you go. It's satisfying. I don't know. The colors, they're fine. They match the rear seat. You've got the two sunroofs again, but you still got room for the lights and the sunlight. Everything's been made space for. I feel like they've just taken everything into account here. They've got the seat belts. They've got your door cards aren't clipping with a seat or anything like that. It just seems pretty well put together. I'm just not the biggest fan of the wood across the dashboard, but I don't know what you guys think about an idea like that.
I do have thoughts about that as well. I can tell you exactly why that would not be done. And it's just pure, function. Because if you have anything projected onto a material that has contrasts in itself and structure in itself, you will compromise readability. And modern design is all about readability and clarity and all that. So you would never see something like this in a car that is designed by, let's say in air quotes, professionals. Because they tend to have weird ideas as well. They are not immune to those. But this is not a very usable way. And you can even see it in this shot that we have right here. That the material does also produce glare. If you are projecting onto something, it needs to be perfectly matte, so that it's not going to blind you at night or whatnot, even though strength of projection, of course, can be changed. But that is just something I note. It doesn't quite fit together with modern themes that we see in general, and it's one of the most important parts of the design, because that is where you get all your information from. What I do, however, like a lot is you have the cup holders and the little extra bottle down there, sitting there, somehow secured in their little spots. Overall, a lot of design going on underneath that surface that is used for projections. I have not figured out what all those red buttons are for. If they are buttons, if they are just lights. You have them in the rear as well, on the sides, and I just don't quite know what they are.
think they're just basically design elements for the sake of being design elements, with some lighting element in them. I like how they're consistently done from kind of all around the car, which is it's an interesting choice just to kind of break up what would be otherwise a fairly monotonous brown or black surface. So I'm kind of glad they did that. I do agree that on the one hand, I kind of like the idea of the wood dashboard with everything either projected on it or perhaps there's actually like a glass overlay with the screen over top of that. But I think if it is going to be done, it would have to be done with more care than this. It's as Rob pointed out, you really can see even in this shot with the lighting that has been selected that there's already part of the screen that's not hugely readable, and I imagine that in more extreme lighting conditions, like say if you're driving with the sun to your back at fairly low, like at sunrise or sunset, this whole dashboard would be completely and utterly unreadable, which is not particularly helpful. I will comment on the colors that, in spite of the fact that this is a very dark interior, it's a very the brown interior and brown elements make it a kind of a warm and inviting place to be, which is kind of nice. It feels almost cozy in a way. You know, it's like somewhere you could just sit down and it'd be a nice, quiet, relaxed experience being inside. Something that I will point out though that is a little bit of a miss is the shape of the wood trim on the front doors is different from the shape of the wood trim on the rear doors, and that's not really. It's a little bit inconsistent, I would say. You can especially see it from this view here, looking towards the rear door card, that you have the rounded trim up front, which is exactly what you kind of expect to see, and then it's just this flat section in the rear. I'm not sure that would actually be done by anybody in the real world.
That is a good observation, yeah.
One thing I would like to point out is that the roof design from the inside looks really nice. I love what I see there. This is just feeling very premium.
Yeah, glass roof really does do that. You know, it gives it a really airy, premium feel. It's maybe not the best thing in the world to live with, because when you have this much glass in a car, you can only imagine that sitting outside on a hot summer day, it would be like an oven inside. So
especially on dark colored leather. Oh yeah. Oh, can you imagine sitting on that after a day at the beach? Jesus, you'd be wanting to go back into the sea again. Yeah, that would definitely heat you up all right.
Yeah, I'm hoping that this car has some kind of a variable tint function in that glass, or a way to just shade it if need be, because it would be very unpleasant on a hot summer's day. I'd also like to point out that the rear defog elements are really kind of distracting from this view. They're really quite large, and you can actually see they're not very evenly spaced either here. So a little bit of a miss there, I think.
But overall, I have to say I do quite like this interior in general. There's little tiny bits that I would change if I was doing it, but I'm not the one doing it, and so I'm going to say I actually quite like this one overall, without the few little nitpicks and whatever else it may be. I think they did a decent job at creating a luxury interior for a sedan.
Yeah, I have to agree, actually. I mean, it's the details that I did point out that I'm not a fan of. They are really quite minor details overall. The general theme of this is quite nice, I think.
Now this, a little bit different than previous cars. It's a supercar. Definitely no debating that. And I believe I see a 3-abreast front seating arrangement, similar to, well, there's real-life cars in this shape, actually. There's a few examples of them. But if we have a look at that, you've got the center steering position and then the 3 seats. Now, of course, the number one thing I'm going to say here is, well, the front seat does kind of sit over the top of the 2 side ones a little bit. Maybe that does that in real life, I'm not entirely sure, but I think there's probably a bigger question than that above my head, and that is, do you sort of count an exotic car as a luxury car? Because if you don't, obviously that's a bit of a problem to begin with, but if you do, it does seem to lack any sort of luxury details. So we look at the dashboard, there's not really a lot going on. There's some vents, some little there's little mirrors or something, I'm not entirely sure, maybe little screens, don't know what would be displayed to them if they were. And as for the door cards, it's very bland. There's a single switch and a speaker is all you're getting. And yeah, of course, in a lightweight stripped out supercar, oh, I get that most certainly, but As far as luxury goes, I don't know if I would put this level of exotic into the same category per se, especially with those racing pedals and that very simple like wheel, and the color contrast once again is very similar to the first car, I believe, with the dark on that super bright. I just don't know. I feel like that's it wanting to be luxury, whereas the design itself isn't making much of an attempt to be. That's how I feel. I'm not entirely sure if you guys feel the same way.
Well, now that you've pointed it out, I certainly would agree with that and feel it as well. Some things I would like to point out while just seeing this screen here, right here, is there are some, to the sides of the steering wheel, there's some very large empty areas that would probably be a bit more hidden if they wanted to be kept that simple. Which I can understand for a supercar. If it's actually about performance, then you would want to do something with them that is kind of hidden and doesn't give away that there is not much detail on there, though. Something lightweight, hopefully. What I really do like is how the outside color of the car is the finer trim color of the seats. That really fits. And I think it's a very nice choice to have this beige and then this slightly lighter blue, but in a very subtle way. And I wish there had been some more effort put into, for instance, the doors to have some of this trim lining as well. And probably on the front, it would have benefited from it, because if we just go onto the view with the steering wheel, there is really not that much going on. And yes, I do get the theme of the Athena, that is, it's all about the driving experience, right? But there are no highlights. This is a missed opportunity here, I think, with the having just streaks of blue here and there, maybe beneath the Athena and the next panel down, and then again a little lower, and something like that could have worked really well.
Yeah, I tend to agree with everything you've both said, is that it feels like a really missed opportunity here. Just to qualify what Shiny said about this car being more of an exotic and less of a luxury car, I do completely agree. You just have a quick look at the outside there. This really doesn't fit with the design brief, but it is generally well done in a lot of places. There are some pretty big miscues here and there. I will say that when you look at it from this angle, when you're kind of looking from a passenger seat, a lot of it feels like what should happen is the dashboard should wrap around a little bit. Like, the driver should obviously be the central focus. In a car like this, that's what you expect. But you'd kind of expect the dashboard to kind of curve around towards the back a little bit, just to increase that feeling that the driver is the most important person in the car. Because, I mean, that's when you have a central driving position, that's what you're saying, is that the driver is number one in the car, and the passengers are more of an afterthought than maybe, a standard two-seat arrangement. The lack of contrast in the dashes is definitely, it definitely takes away from it, and it draws your attention kind of towards the steering wheel and not really kind of around the car. I feel it's definitely a bit of a missed opportunity for sure. Also, I'd like to point out that I'm not sure about how the door handles and the power windows controls would work if you're in the driver's seat and not in the passenger seat. That seems like an awfully large reach, and kind of an awkward reach as well for the door handle. So I'm not a really big fan of how that worked. One thing I will say though, and this is props to the designer for doing this, but a supercar like this is always going to be a very tight and confined space, just because most of the space in the car is devoted to the engineering components, like the engine, the suspension, so on and so on.
One thing that I find absolutely hilarious, though, is the little clip-in part of the seatbelt. That is so tiny. It is so tiny. It's made for tiny hands.
It's just a little bit, isn't it? I don't know if that would exactly keep you safe. I know the seats like this are made for harnesses, not quite your single over the lap and over your shoulder seatbelt. But I guess they did what they could with what they had. Although, I will say, the passengers, they're not important enough. They're peasants. They're behind the driver. They don't get safety. They've got all this space in front of them to go smash their head off air. There's no seatbelt for them. I will say, if you're going to put a seatbelt in, you probably should put it in all the seats. Is probably the only other thing I would really point out.
I think you can actually, in this view, you can actually kind of see the seatbelt, but it's done in a very different way. There's that sort of little vertical
you're
strip
actually
there.
correct. Do you know what? I take that back. There is something behind the seat. That's interesting. So the driver gets one coming through. That is strange, isn't it? All right. Well, I mean, I guess at least they're not gonna die in a horrible crash. That's the biggest compliment I can give them. There you go. All right. Could be worse then. That's fair enough. Ooh, swapping up again. Very interesting shape, and dare I say it's an SUV, and therefore the first of the SUVs that we're seeing today, and I'm sure there are going to be more. Now, with a sort of SUV of this style, kind of futuristic once again, kind of looking, if I must say, with that very sleek roofline. Inside, I would expect a lot of rear legroom, and I guess we'll see if that's the truth. But the dashboard also, maybe some wood elements I'm predicting. Let's have a look and see if I am right. And, oh, well, there you go. A little bit more wood than I was expecting. And once again, projections onto the wood, like earlier. Is this a thing in real life that I'm just, like, missing out on? Because that's the second time I've seen that, and I thought that was a unique concept before. But there you go, someone's had the same idea, but this time, very white. In fact, so white that I believe the floor has opened up a new document on Microsoft Word because it has just gone to the void, hasn't it? It's just the whitest white the world has ever seen. Let's see if the back reflects what the front looks like, shall we? Oh my goodness gracious, that is busy. Now, what I said about legroom was 100% correct. I can definitely pat myself on the back for that one. Although, I'll tell you one thing I'm not quite liking right off the bat here. And it may just be a personal thing, but I'm not too big on mixing wood colours that much, especially if they're this different. A very dark wood there versus a very light wood. And of course, the dark wood does have those dark tops to the door panels going down the sides and up the back. So there's a contrast there for that colour that's good. And of course, the seats have a little bit of a light brown trim to them, and that is also contrasting well with the lighter coloured wood. But if we look at the front seats, I have noticed that the front seats do not have not only the same pattern, but they don't have the trim either. Finding that a little bit strange of a contrast, especially when there's so much effort into the back. This front seat just looks like it's sort of thrown in. Not entirely sure what the thought process was, but I must say the effort is undeniable. I have to give 100% credit. They've went all out to make sure that whoever is in the back of this car feels like goddamn royalty. But the driver is kind of looking at wood while his passenger is sitting on a chair that's stolen out of a 1980s base model sedan by the looks of things. I'm not entirely sure that the front seat design is appropriate or contrasts with the rear too well. What do you guys think about how the front seat looks in this car compared to how the back seats are trimmed?
I think this is a pretty perfect example of a chauffeur car, right? So you're never going to drive this yourself because that is the worst seat in the whole car. You have to stare at this weird projection thing that doesn't have any contrast, worse than before. Look at the nav set there. That is like gray on dark brown on other dark grays, and I can't I can't figure out how you would see anything on that. So that is very questionable. And then yes, the passenger seat is just for the bodyguard. You know, it's chauffeur, bodyguard. Who cares about their comfort?
Wow, that bodyguard's not getting much appreciation from the design company, is he?
No, he's not the one paying for the car.
Selling this as only a chauffeur car. That's interesting. So this would be a mega rich person's car, one of those that they give to you with the bodyguard, and you pay monthly to have him with your car, and he probably delivers it to you, like, and then the chauffeur comes with him, like he's the one getting all the work dumped onto him. The chauffeur's getting the nice paycheck. That isn't way of looking at it that I hadn't thought of. Although, one thing I will say though, from the manufacturer's point of view, in terms of profits from a luxury car like this, would they rather throw cheap seats in the front, or would they rather just give the full package and have the person pay for the full thing? As I would probably, I don't know, I can't think of too many examples in which I've seen the front of a car, from factory at least, for the front of a car look like scum compared to the back, which looks like Buckingham Palace. I'm not entirely sure about it still, but I definitely see where you're coming from, though. I do get the idea, and I actually find it quite humorous, if I'm honest. But yeah, I don't know. I just feel like even at least the pattern could have been similar, even if it wasn't trimmed the same way. I'm still not super sold on the seats, but yeah, I do see the chauffeur point of view, in which case he's just there to drive you around. He'd be sitting on a cactus for all I care.
That's a good way of putting it, actually. And yeah, I do agree. This is definitely a chauffeured car. This is not something you would drive yourself. It's very obvious that was what the builders tried to get across, is that this is a car to ride in. I'm not sure. You mentioned mixing of the wood colors. The other thing that's actually been done here is mixing different metals as well. Like there's kind of the gold trim, but there's also the silver trim in places too. And I think it's maybe just a little bit too much. It's got a little bit of the... It kind of takes away from the design overall. And I'd actually also add that I'm really not a particularly big fan of all the gold trim in places. It's just a little... I mean, a car like this is always going to be gaudy inside to a degree, but this just takes it to a level that's maybe a bit too much. I'm not really sure about the screen placement either, with it being between right behind the front seats like that. It seems... It's better than the one screen that we saw that was hanging down from the roof. I'll give it that much, but...
Also, you see very appropriate leather texture sizing here. That is what I would expect. It's really nice also with the logo inset there, even though maybe having it chrome is not the best choice. Making it a just ever so slightly darker or brighter version of the material that you have already in that place is probably a better choice, as it should just be a subtle hint, not like in your face obvious.
There is a likelihood that there's a bit of a restriction in terms of it's probably a badge that they can't recolor just due to the game restrictions. So I can understand why it's probably left as chrome. But yeah, in real life you wouldn't want to be resting your head on a solid chrome badge, would you? But yeah, I do sympathize that that's probably a bit of a limitation they faced. But overall, there's no denying that the effort put into this is second to none. It's excellent. They put a lot of work into achieving this luxury atmosphere. And you're right about the whole chauffeur thing. It pulls it off exactly how it probably should. I would definitely give them big credit for that.
I really do like this, just from this shot alone, this rear shot that we're seeing here. This is a fantastic build to me, because just this alone doesn't have the massive struggle with consistency as the other things do. Because you do see the brown from the general upper car trim of the sides and the back in the darker wood color, while you have this brighter, almost pinkish seeming otherwise wood, and then the nice bright leather color and the gold trim, which is very... It's not really gold, because gold would be more yellow than this. It is more messing-like. It kind of flows nicely with the rest that we're seeing there. But yeah, there's just such a big difference to the front. And I fully agree with your point that it wouldn't be that big of a difference. Like they don't have a +2 in front and then your mega ultra royalty whale penis leather in the rear. I mean, that's a bit much of a difference there.
Getting in and out of this is going to be a bit of a challenge with the shape of certainly the console on the door side, and sort of the shape of the entry portal. It's not exactly something you're going to be able to get into and out of, say, if you're of limited mobility. That's a very unusually shaped opening with a very high and very deep sill.
Is this door like opening completely for driver and passenger in the rear at the same time, like vertically?
I think it's suicide doors. Let's just
okay, I see. Yeah, it is. Okay.
Yeah, it is suicide doors. Yeah, okay. Maybe it's a little bit better than I thought then.
Yeah. One thing that really hammers home this point of chauffeur and all that. This could be an armored vehicle as well. It does look has the beefcake look to it that it requires for that. And you also see that it has a step down there to help you in, to get into that weird position in the rear. So maybe it's not quite as bad.
Now this is definitely not as extreme as of an SUV, but it could still be passed off as luxury, providing the inside reflects that feeling from the customer at the end of the day. So let's have a look and see if it really does have that on the inside. Now, right away, pretty standard shaped dashboard, nothing too crazy. It's got the wood like everything else. It's got your gauges with a little digital sat-nav in the middle. Gauges themselves aren't actually digital too, unless they're intended to be. It doesn't personally look like that's what they were going for. They have the center screen, as you'd expect, a very small one. Once again, not sure if that's the most luxurious thing in the world, but let's have a look at the seat patterns, and if that brings anything. Very similar seat patterns we've seen already with the diamond shapes, but my goodness, one thing I have to say is that is a hell of a strong colour. Very strong. It's looking like you're lost out in the Australian outback kind of colour. The really extreme sort of dusty, sandy levels of orange, just pure orange. And I have to say that on top of the black, very strong colour versus a very dark colour, and then a very light colour in the wood. I don't quite like it, I must be honest. Those trays and in the dashboard you'll see the wood as well. It's the same colour, and it just, I think it's too much. The wood is supposed to be sort of a subtle kind of luxury. It's like, yeah, there's wooden detailing. This kind of draws your eyes to it immediately because it's the brightest thing in the car. I think, I mean, even if you went for a darker wood, I feel like the brown or orange in the cars almost is too strong to even go with that. I just think the orange is a bit of a miss on the color choice. I feel like it just needs to be brighter to go with the wood, or you need darker wood and then less saturated seats. Something like that. I'm not entirely sure. And one other thing I want to point out too is the red. You'll see red on the door cards beneath the table here, and also in the front underneath the dashboard. There's red detailing, bright red, and that doesn't appear anywhere on the outside of the car or on the inside other than in those places, and I'm not sure what it's doing there. There's a lot of questions I have, really. I don't just like the general atmosphere. If the colors were better, it's all put together reasonably alright. There's definitely nothing wrong in terms of that, but I do think just the color choices are just so strange, all put together in the same place. I don't know, I think the colors are just sort of putting me off more than the design itself, really.
I definitely tend to agree with the colors. It is rather stark looking on the inside. And maybe the red comes from the fact that they needed a color to contrast the interior color choices. And the only thing that was left on the color palette that was stronger than what they had was a 25500 red. So it might be that. But these little tables that are folding out there also do look a little flimsy, don't they? They look more flimsy than what you get in the airplane and in the peasant compartment. And I'm not so sure about the patchworking here. Once again, it's nicely structured on the seats, which do have different color themes, by the way, which does look really weird, and also has the problem, like you pointed out, that is just way too brown. But then the patchwork there on the door cards, like, again, completely different diamond shapes. Well, why does that have to be a thing? But let's say something positive. If you look up in the roof, I think there's some good attempts at detail there with the little hold on to your dear life kind of bars that you have there. Although they seem to be in a rather awkward position as well. I'm not so sure if you would like dislocate your shoulder as much to really hang on to them. But yeah, the look up is quite nice. You can see that there was enough effort put into this to actually have seatbelts that look somewhat functional.
Yeah, I generally agree with the sentiments that you've both had. I will say that when I first looked at this, my first reaction was like, "Oh my god, I'm inside a pumpkin." It's just that kind of a color.
That's Halloween themed.
It is a little bit, and I just don't think this color works, and I don't think it's such a weird color, and it's actually kind of an off-putting color in a way. I don't think you could really ever make it work for a car interior. especially with the combination of the black and the really light wood, it just takes away so much from the design. I mean, you can especially see here that just how much of a clash it is between the light wood, the black front seats, which is, as Rob pointed out, that are completely different to the rear seats, and the pumpkin leather. I just don't know if it's a look that was really worth doing in the first place, and I'm not sure about the shape of that wood element in the front door, especially when you consider that from the rear, in the rear compartment, it just there's nothing to mirror it or match any of the shapes that are going on back there. There's a shocking amount of inconsistency going on here. Now, having said that, I do quite like the dash. It's very minimalist, but it's also the kind of minimalist that you would see from a company that's perhaps rejecting some of the modern design trends and saying, you know, we don't want to have these great big gaudy screens. We don't want to have all this ridiculous bling. It's very well put together, very well crafted, and very well considered overall. And it's refreshing to see in a way that it is so almost minimalist in a way. And while I don't really appreciate the color, I think the contrast strip between the wood and the black dash is a very nice touch and very nicely and very neatly done.
This to me is by far the best part of the car. It looks really clean, and the dividing line there. I think the color of this brown that we all love so much actually works because there's so little of it. And yes, the nicely shaped lines there where it goes down towards the center console, it really works. It is a minimalist design. It doesn't look super luxurious, but this could very well be the basis of a, I'd say, premium interior.
Yeah, and a special shout out for the design of the vents too. That's quite nice. I like how it's got the crosshair motif in it. It's very tidy looking.
Ooh, no, I have actually seen this car prior to judging, but I haven't actually had a dive inside yet. It's very interesting on the outside, and definitely looks like almost a sort of more compact, but still very heavy looking luxury coupe, I suppose. Yeah, it's the first coupe of this whole batch, I think, actually. So that's pretty unique to see. It's pretty cool. And inside, we'll see if it reflects that. Goodness me, it does. That's a small windscreen, isn't it? But that's not the important part. It's the interior, and the interior itself is another case of very bright on very dark, which I've made it clear I'm perfectly okay with. And if we have a look at the back seats here, we'll see that that is more of the same story. You've got the dark and the bright, but look at those seat patterns. That's something a little bit different. It keeps the diamonds, but there's more going on if we've got another shot of the front seats, perhaps. Yeah, oh, look at that. That is perfect right there. You got those cross-haired diamonds and the horizontal lines running between them. It shakes it up a little bit, doesn't it? I quite like that. I quite like it. I do believe, once again, we're seeing a case of the diamonds on the door being slightly more stretched than the perfect diamonds we're seeing on the seats. Not quite as much of an offender, but it's still something I've noted. I believe there's a shot of the roof here. We're going to have a look what's going on with that. There's no sunroof, but there is a night sky above you. Now, that is an oddity, isn't it? But, oh god, I do quite like it. You also have, of course, your handle for the front passengers only to be hanging on to, and it is quite a contrast with that dark roof, wouldn't you say? But I'm going back to the dashboard again, since I didn't quite mention anything about that. I like it. There's a lot of things going on with it, though. A lot of vents in that center console, a lot of buttons and switches, and you'd really need to know what does what, or else you're just going to be flicking things and hoping things happen. I do want to point out something that I didn't quite clock right away, but did eventually notice and appreciate, was there's kind of, you can almost feel there's a bit of a retro vibe going on, like a future retro kind of vibe, where it's all sort of modern design everywhere, but takes some sort of old elements and implements them. Like, look at that single gauge behind the steering wheel that's accompanied by the digital screen. That's pretty cool. I must say I quite like that, because I think the outside design is, they're sort of going for an angle like that as well, in a way. So inside, to see that sort of reflected is, I think that's quite cool. And everything's circular. It's all the same sort of shapes being used. Even the rear view mirror in the center there is very rounded. It's all, the shapes are getting reused throughout the car. I think I really like it. I really do like this one. It looks like a great place to be. And for a luxury coupe, That's what I expect it to be like. It is, I think, possibly one of the most believable in this entire list. I'm not sure if you guys feel the same way.
I do agree with that. This is definitely the best one we've seen so far in terms of just how things are consistent all around and seem believable in terms of this being a luxury vehicle. And yes, the gauges do take you back a few many years there compared to what the projection stuff we have seen would imply for the previous contestants. And I do like the slightly asymmetrical design here on the front. It's this digital screen there backing the big gauge is going to the center, but not too far. And then there is some interesting design element going on the side there. I don't know what that is supposed to be, if it's just a reflection of the material, or if that is some kind of lighting that shows the current sound system, the current waveform. If that is the case, we are currently listening to the radio station called White Noise. And we do see two speakers to the lower right and lower left, and top right and top left as well. Lots of attention to detail here in the center console, lots of controls, and maybe a little too much. It could be cleaned up slightly. It feels a wee bit too busy in the middle. But if we go to the back, I do have a big worry, and that is space, which there is none of. Look at these seats. Like, where I have knees. Sorry, I can't I can't sit in this one.
Hey, see, you don't understand. This is for ferrying my legless children to school.
Ah, I see.
That's why I bought a two-door, because I only have to squash them in the back for a few minutes and drag them out when I'm done.
Oh, yeah, you still have... If you have small ones, they are sitting in their own seats anyway and can dirty down your beautiful leather seats in the rear with their shoes still left on and all the mud on them. So that's a perfect fit, I would say. One thing that I also do not like, and I wanted to point it out like that because otherwise this is a really solid design, I think, is those sausage-like side cushions that are on there. They are massive. Like, what is this?
Yeah, they're way too big, I think. If they were thinner but sort of a similar height, I think that would have worked quite a bit better. It's a bit much. One thing I will point out is the texture that you were talking about, Rob, in the dashboard. Those are actually all individual little fixtures placed alongside in, I think it's the same metal that trims the steering wheel and between the wood and the leather elements in the dashboard. So there's some very intricate texturing and surfacing going on there, which is really cool to look at. Not sure I'd really want to ever have to clean it, but it's a really interesting look, for sure. And generally, I do like the details. I especially like the little rotating knobs in the steering wheel with their knurled. I think that looks like copper or bronze or something, and the other metal. It's a very nice contrast. It looks really cool, and I'm not sure how practical it would be in real life because there's not really anywhere to have like an electronic sensor put in there. But you can't fault it for its appearance, that's for sure. The other thing I really like is all the little organ pulls for the air vents. That's a really well thought out detail. It's exactly something you'd see in sort of especially more of a retro themed luxury car, because that's exactly what you'd see in certainly in like an old Rolls Royce or a Bentley or a lot of other cars from many years ago. The center console, yeah, I think it's a little bit busy, and I think it kind of feels like, in a way, it kind of feels like all the switches and all the knobs and everything were just loaded up into a shotgun and just blasted at it and said, okay, that's where that's going to go. We're done then. It's a little bit haphazard, which is, it does take away a little bit from the overall design. And I think some of the problem too, and it's maybe my biggest issue with this design overall, is that there just isn't really enough contrast between the light colored leather and the light colored wood. It being in the same family of colors and the same, well, it's basically exactly the same color. I just don't think it really works very well. I think a like a really, really light, almost a blonde wood would have been better. Even trending towards just like an off-white. Or perhaps going in the other direction and having a very dark wood, or even like piano black would have looked better, I think, overall. Also, I'm really not sure about these door handles. They're straight out of a 1980s Volkswagen Golf. It's a little bit down market, I think, and a little bit of an oversight.
A little bit cheap, I have to admit, definitely. But I mean, at least they keep the same material as the other metals in the car. I'll give it that.
Well, this is true.
But yeah, I have to say, the only thing that really puts me off once again is those giant balloon sausage things on the doors, at the back of the doors. Anyway, that definitely is a bit of a strange decision. I'm not entirely sure what went on there. I feel like just a bit more time and play with different fixture shapes could have achieved that goal a bit more noticeably, sensibly, with more effort into it. And I think that really would have tidied up and really complemented the effort that's went into the rest of the design, most certainly. But aside from that, not a lot lets me down, really. I definitely do like this one quite a lot.
I think they would have gotten away with moving the whole rear seat assembly just back a little, and even if it's seemingly merging with some other components there in the back, as long as they don't stick out of the window, I think it would look better overall, because then the sausages aren't like encroaching on your space as much either, because you just give them some more breathing room, and they seem to need a lot of it.
Just hope that your driver is 4'2" and has to move his seat all the way forward. That would be of benefit to the rear passengers, most certainly. It's just a good thing they don't breathe through their legs.
Yeah, I do agree that this, especially from this view here, the big sausages are... This interior is already very small. It's by far the smallest interior of all the cars we've looked at so far, and this just gives it it really feels like it takes away from a lot of the space, even though like it doesn't really actually take away from the interior space too much. It just makes it feel really almost claustrophobic at times. Just you're hemmed into this thing a little bit too much, maybe.
Back to the sedans, I see. Okay, interesting. Now, big lumpy red thing with a big lumpy cream and black interior. Not quite as bright of a contrast as before, but still quite strong. Interesting dashboard shape. I actually kind of like it, and I'm going to assume that those gauges are also digital. They do look like that to me. The center screen, very small. Yeah, I mean, I like it personally. Not sure if you would want it bigger, or if there'd be more going on, maybe like a pop-up screen, the passenger side or something, a bit more what you'd see in a car like this in real life. But do you know what? I like it anyway. I'm definitely not going to dig it for something I quite enjoy. And the back seats, they keep the same color going on, except there's a little less contrast going on. It's not so much black. That shelf behind those seats is also the same color as the seats themselves and the little compartments that appear to be between them. Now, I'm not sure how you're going to open that middle one. I feel you're going to have to squeeze the sides of those seats out of the way just to get that open, and I can just hear the noise of leather squeezing against leather, and it's driving me insane. So I'm not going to think about that. I think the side ones might suffer the same problem. Who knows? Maybe it's just very flexible leather. Who am I to judge? It has the seatbelts going on. That's a good thing, most certainly. And now this is where it falls apart for me a little bit, because what is happening with the door cards here? I can see they went for a very unique shape, but I almost wish they sort of didn't, because the execution of it is more like an atomic bomb dropping. It's sort of just scattered everything in all sorts of directions. I'm not entirely sure, and of course I respect that maybe the lighting and reflections may be throwing off exactly what it looks like, but it still seems to me like a little bit messy. I don't know. I can't say I'm massive on the shapes they've got going on above those sort of, you know, besides your arms, really, shall we say. And you also have a picture of the seats next to the door handles there, like a little badge of the seats. That's a strange inclusion, but I guess it's not offensive. It's just there. But yeah, those shapes, they're kind of letting me down a little bit. I don't know about you guys.
I would like to add that I think the design of the little seat badge there is perfect, because that is just the controls for moving your seat, and that makes perfect sense to me. But yes, those shapes underneath, oh my god, it's like what is this, like small fins, or no, I don't know. But talking about the the positives here. I really like the shape of the dashboard with this nice swoopy shape down there in the piano black. I think this is really stylish, and it has a nice contrast to the bright interior. I think the look of it overall is not quite 2020, but maybe something more like 2010-ish. I'm entirely unsure, but this seems like not quite in the present. Overall, though, I do like how much space, feeling of space you get, especially in the rear. This is like immense. Like, you have proper 2 seats back there, and you can't elbow the one who's sitting next to you that easily. In the previous car, we had the safety sausages to prevent you from that, but here they are not needed. And I think the texture on them is cutting a little deep. I find this a little awkward looking on the seats. It's a very, very deep cut in those elements. They overall, I mean, the design is pretty consistent. Well, let's not talk about the door cards there, but I really like it overall. There's a lot of good stuff going on here. Also, nice use of the screen, which you can have, and the storage space underneath that you see here for the rear passengers. I think that's quite pretty. But then there's, what is this? Is this a kind of door opening handle from the 60s or 50s? What is this?
Door handle does feel a little bit out of place, I think. You know, in a car like this, you'd probably expect something a little less obtrusive, or maybe even just have a button to open the door. You know, considering that you're going to be spending a huge amount of money on this, a car like this is probably going to have soft closed doors, so you don't even need a traditional handle necessarily. I do have to agree that overall it's a very nicely put together interior, and I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt with the screens at the front, and that while the screen for the infotainment is definitely a very much on the small side for a car of this era, perhaps the entire dashboard is a screen itself that's just being divided up into different sections. So maybe I'll give them the benefit of the doubt for that. I will say that it is a miscue here that they've used a light color on the actual dashboard, right up against the windshield, and also in the back as well. The reason being is that a light color like that, if you have the light shining on it, it will create such a tremendous amount of glare on the windshield that you probably wouldn't be able to see out of it at all, which is kind of a safety issue. And I'd also add that I think that the huge amount of piano black that goes around the instrument cluster is, again, not really something you would see in a production car, because it's just so distracting when you have the light shining off it that you just wouldn't do that. I will take a contrary opinion that I actually kind of like the shapes in the door cards. It's maybe not the most tidily implemented feature in the car, but I get the idea what they were going for. They're just trying to build some texture and some shape into an otherwise pretty flat part of the design that is difficult to put some shape into. And I've had some prior experience with this car before in one of our other challenges, but these are actually all individually placed 3D fixtures. So there's a lot of work and a lot of repetition that has gone into making that.
Oh, most certainly. I can definitely respect the intent with it, absolutely, because it would look very barren otherwise. And I respect they tried something. Definitely, you're right, could have been tidied up a little bit more. But, I mean, there's so many other things to appreciate aside from that anyway, because I didn't even notice that the rear seat pockets from the front seats there, that's a scoop fixture purposed into, like, a pocket. I think that's brilliant. I've never quite seen that before. Really, really like what they did there. And what you said about the bright color being directly below the windscreen, I hadn't actually thought of that. You have a very good point there, and I do like you said, the piano black as you put it on that dashboard. Definitely, maybe a bit more shiny than you'd expect to be, but I do like the contrast of the colors themselves. Maybe, although as you're saying, yes, safety hazard is a thing. If this was to be believed, it's a real design. Most certainly, it would come to mind. So as much as it looks pretty, functionality-wise, you're definitely right about that. But I have to say, I still really do like, especially like that display behind the steering wheel alone. Like that's pretty satisfying. I like that. I do like what's going on there.
Yeah, I agree. The shapes and the design of the dashboard, especially like the way it feels very driver centric without being totally in your face, it's really very satisfying. I really quite like it. What's going on there? It's just maybe could have been implemented a little bit better with materials. I don't know what you think about that, Rob.
I do agree, especially once you made those points about the colors on the front and the glare that it would produce. You can't unsee that, and even with dark gray, you get those issues. I mean, it's so brutal. And then if you have piano black and you get reflections on it, ooh, yeah, that can be quite nasty. But it does look so good. I really like the piano black plus chrome trim. Like in the right light, if you let's hope you're not driving, it is beautiful to look at. One thing that I would like to look at is if this shape of the dashboard does have a resemblance on the outside of the car, because that is what I would expect, and I think it does. Well, at least it is a nicely shaped and very aerodynamic car, so you could almost see the car profile in there. That would have been a really nice touch if it were even more shaped like the car. It could have been maybe a little gimmicky, but well, we have seen worse things today, so.
Yeah, I generally think this is, especially in comparison with the outside, the interior of the car is very harmonious with that, it's nice to see that it feels cohesive. You know, the people who styled the exterior of the car were also communicating with the people who styled the interior of the car, and they work closely together. It's very important that it's done that way, because you know, having a car that feels like something completely different inside is a little bit jarring and not necessarily great design work.
Now finally, I have figured out what these weird sills or whatever are for. This is, of course, audio related. They are having a recording booth in here, and they need to get rid of that residual sound somehow. And those are like perfectly for those quiet rooms, aren't they? They suck up all the sound from on the inside. It would probably be very quiet driving, but don't open your eyes, because you might not like it as much as the sound of it. And that concludes this category. A big thanks to our guest for joining us, and thank you for watching. Check out the links below and subscribe to the channel to not miss any of the competition videos.